Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See detail.
Today on CityCast Boise, Idaho had a significant red wave this week, with several legislative seats flipping to Republican and a new addition to the state constitution. We're looking forward to what this could mean for the 2025 legislative session and how we're winding down post-election. It's Friday, November 8th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Happy Friday, everyone. Joining me today is Boise State Public Radio's Jimmy Dawson. Good to have you on the show, Jimmy.
Hey, good to be back, Lindsay.
This is definitely an interesting week, interesting Friday to have you on the show. I don't know if that makes it more interesting or more difficult, but I am really glad you're here. What was your biggest takeaway this week, or what election are you still thinking about? What result?
It would probably just be that it was a really good election to be a Republican in Idaho. Because we saw the influence of the top ticket races with President-elect Trump really kind of forcing that down ballot voting, right? Where districts that, were certainly tough for Democrats to compete in, they just had no chance, at least from these results. And specifically District 15 in West Boise, if we're going around the Treasure Valley, Pocatello wasn't good for Democrats.
District 29 was definitely some seats got flipped there, especially in the House. So
yes,
Mary Shea came up a little short and Nate Roberts lost his seat.
Yeah, and the only reason, we didn't see anything in the Senate was because Democratic incumbent James Ruckte was unopposed.
Yeah. And it was, I know there were some nail biters. People were wondering, I think, what is your sense from maybe the Idaho Democrats about how this turned out? Was this what they were anticipating? Maybe not so much loss, or, were they hoping for a little more movement or even to just hold ground?
I think that the best scenario that they could come up with would probably have been to maybe get 1 or 2 seats somewhere, wherever it was, or at least hold ground. Because, we see consistently, no matter where you are in the country, presidential elections always bring out more people. Even though, we saw that Kamala Harris got fewer votes than Joe Biden, in 2020 in many places. So that doesn't necessarily, draw down turnout too much. But I think that would have been their best case scenario, especially because they put a lot of effort into getting at least one Democrat in every district, in one of the 3 legislative races. And they were successful in getting 3/4 of those races competitive, but it just didn't matter in the end. And you saw, we heard from Lauren Necochea earlier this morning, who's the Democratic Party chair. She said, deeply troubling, quote, that they lost ground as, she says, quote, Republican extremists are gaining strength. But she knew that they were always going to be tough races. And I think if you're a Democrat in Idaho, you have to kind of be realistic about your chances in many, many districts.
Yeah, especially, they had somebody running in every district this election. But that's really a first for in decades and decades and decades. So, the first go around of that isn't necessary. That's not going to necessarily yield results the first time you do that. Especially, it did seem to me, based on the data I've seen, that Idaho did get more red over the past 4 years. Even compared to the 2020 election, like very clearly, Ada County got more red, and it seems like the rest of the state did as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That was something that I was kind of watching on election night was, will Kamala Harris at least get even closer? Like, will a Democratic presidential candidate get closer to winning Ada County, which, Hasn't happened in a very long time. Idaho last went for a Democratic presidential candidate in 1964,
Mm-hmm.
LBJ. And no, she lost crowns. She got, thousands fewer votes than Joe Biden did in 2020, because it was only like a 4 percentage point difference between Biden and Trump in 2020. So you're right. Ada County certainly got more red, or at least those who voted red showed up more.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like some of the districts that, we talked about Pocatello, but even around Blaine County, District 26, these that were seemed, a little purple, or a little like maybe Dems could still hold spots there. They still, this election, it was kind of a wipeout. I mean, District 26 representative for District 26A, Ned Burns, lost his seat. Just recently, this seat kind of flipped back and forth. District 26 senator, it had initially looked like Laura Lickley, a Republican, had taken that Senate seat, and that Ron Taylor lost his seat. But some more counting, some more, maybe ballots counted. It seemed like it took them a while, or something happened there. But Ron Taylor did hold on by his fingernails.
Yeah, he did. That Lori Likely race was really tough because we didn't even get results. I I basically worked a 20-hour shift from Tuesday into Wednesday, and we didn't even get final results by the time I left at about 1:30 in the afternoon. It's really, really tough, especially because not only do you have the pressures of the presidential race getting more people out to vote, but every 10 years, Idaho's legislative districts are redrawn, and Blaine County was put into the same district as Jerome and Lincoln counties, which are very, very much more conservative than Blaine County is, to say the least.
Yeah, so definitely population shifts, or demographic shifts, but also the redistricting played a role in what's happened with that. I'm really curious, Jimmy, your thoughts on Idaho Constitutional Amendment HJR 5 and Prop 1, because I think those had some interesting results, or say some interesting things about Idaho, but I really want to hear your take.
Just from kind of looking at it, it was split between a lot of people that I thought, or that I talked to, about whether or not Prop 1 was going to pass. But I think that the general consensus was that it was going to be close, and it wasn't close at all.
Yeah, no, not even a little bit.
No, I mean, did that shock you that it was like almost 70% of people rejected it?
Yes, I was definitely, when those results first started to come in, and it seemed like we had results, from Ada County and some of these more populous counties quite early. And even then, to see how far behind it was, I really thought it might be a 45-55 or 40-60 maybe. But to see that it was like basically 70-30, basically 3/4 of the state not in favor of it, that was shocking to me.
Yeah, and Blaine County was the only county out of 44 that actually majority supported Prop 1. And the question in the back of our minds as reporters for the last several months since it officially qualified for the ballot was, will ranked choice voting really hurt its chances compared to an initiative that would have just had an open primary? And that's something that we saw all across the country, because there were multiple states that had these ranked choice voting type ballot initiatives, and they failed overwhelmingly. And Alaska looks like it's going to repeal its ranked choice voting system.
Yeah, and I thought it was really interesting because Oregon is not in favor. The Dems in that state were not. So this wasn't a Republican Democrat issue, maybe in Idaho, but across the nation, whatever party has more control in the state did not want ranked choice voting. So in Oregon, the Democrats did not want it. In Idaho, the Republicans did not want it. And it seems like the parties in power did a good job stopping ranked choice voting from becoming part of the election system in each of their states.
And that's what you see too. Like when I reported in Delaware for 5 years, and it's a democratically controlled supermajority state, right? And voting there and in many East Coast states is much more difficult than it is in Idaho. Like When I was there was no excuse absentee ballot voting. You had to register like a month and a half, 2 months before the general election to even participate. And those reforms were not embraced at all by the Democratic majority. Anecdotally, and talking to activists there, it was because they wanted to hold on to power. And that is something that crosses all party lines.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, when I've had conversations about this since the election we've had the results. I've had different friends that I've talked to about this and they've said, well, is this because it's Republicans? I was like, no, the group that is in power in their state does not want to concede any of that power, even to voters. Like that, let's be really honest about that. Like you mentioned in Delaware, they don't necessarily want voters having more access or easier access or a way to subvert or change the power dynamic within their state because they know how an election's going to go. They know how to market their candidates. They know how to organize everything to get the results that benefit them the most. And they don't want that to change.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. So much of your personal info is out of your control, like your insurance provider that has your social security number and your favorite retailer that has your payment details. If they get breached, your information, your identity, is vulnerable. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Prep for Thanksgiving at Whole Foods Market. Save now on no antibiotics ever frozen whole turkey, just $1.49 a pound with Prime. Sales on brie and select seafood appetizers help get things started. For sides, go with wallet-happy favorites from 365 by Whole Foods Market. And finish with decadent desserts from the bakery. Or get your whole spread catered. Just order early. Get Thanksgiving ready at Whole Foods Market. Terms apply.
I'm really curious, Jimmy, about, I know there's a lot of questions, a lot of confusion about the constitutional amendment HJR 5, and it did end up passing. It got almost 65% of the vote, but I had a lot of people who were confused about it. There wasn't a lot of press about it. It kind of slid under the radar.
Yeah, so this is the one that would prevent any non-citizen from voting in any kind of election, within the state of Idaho. And so, this is something that you see in either more liberal cities or more liberal states where they allow non-citizens who, for example, might have permanent status, right? You might have a green card where you can live in the U.S. for, legally for years and years and years, but you might not ever get your citizenship. They allow those folks to vote in municipal elections on like bond and levy issues because they're paying taxes. And this would prevent them from, and will prevent them from doing it since it passed. It's already illegal for non-citizens to vote in state and, federal elections. And so that really wasn't much of a thing. But it's pretty easy, I would say, especially with the demographics in Idaho, where you see non-citizens not voting. Great, stamp it, send it.
Okay, what I've heard, and I guess I didn't know for sure, but this was something that I'm like, that could be a concern that non-citizens could potentially be now not allowed to participate in HOA elections or, different things that it's not about the government, but it could impact their lives. It could impact, property they own or homes or things like that. Does this also cover that? Where if you are not a citizen, let's say you work here, something, you have a house that you live in a subdivision, they're having the HOA elections, you can't vote as part of that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but just looking at the plain language, it says, no person who is not a citizen of the United States shall be a qualified elector in any election held within the state of Idaho. So, yeah, if I were to take the most strict reading of that, absolutely, 0 elections with any kind of consequence would they be able to vote.
Okay, so yeah, so HOA, PTA, anything that even regardless of how it impacts them, they not allowed to participate.
And that's where you get into the legal landscape where it's like, I don't know, if I was a lawyer, sure, maybe you could challenge something like a PTA election. I mean, it would depend. Like, is it a legal entity? An HOA is, and there's, case law around that, and they make legally binding decisions, right? Whereas, like, is it a PTA that is just kind of raising money that then buys some uniforms for some kids? Like, maybe that would be okay. I don't know, but that's something that's going to have to shake out in the courts.
Yeah. That was a concern I had is there is plain language to it, but there's some ambiguity about, like, there's lots of types of elections that are not necessarily governmental elections that people participate in all of the time that could have an impact on people who are not citizens. And so I think altering the Idaho state constitution should be a big deal. And I feel like there is a lot of, I'll just say anti-immigration. A lot of times we'll say anti-illegal immigration, but there seems to be an anti-immigration sentiment with, Donald Trump's campaign. And I wonder if that, has really played up this constitutional amendment that really played into a lot of people's fears or, what they worried might happen if somebody who's not a citizen voted in any kind of election in this state.
I would imagine that, yeah, because if you look at polls for registered Republicans and those who identify as leaning conservative, immigration is much more high on their priority list than those who identify as Democrats or leaning left, right? So I can't imagine that didn't play a role in some form or fashion. But also, the people who might not necessarily realize that federal law and state law already prohibit non-citizens from voting in because, ask the average person on the street, like, do you want someone who's not a citizen voting for your legislator or for your governor? And I think that most people would say no, right? But they don't think that it would affect, for example, property tax issues like bonding levies or HOA elections, right? Things like that. And so, I think that that's absolutely true.
Something else I wanted to make sure that we talk about is that Idaho actually broke a record during this election cycle by having the most ballots cast ever. Like 914,000 people voted in the state of Idaho. I do think that's pretty remarkable for a country that typically has pretty low voter turnout.
Yeah, and Idaho is one of those standout states where we traditionally do just consistently have good election turnout for these presidential general elections. A little bit less so for those midterm governor and state official ones, and certainly pretty abysmal turnout rates for things like school elections, for example,
Yes.
where you get like single digit ones. But I think that's certainly a factor of the population growth that we've seen here, year in, year out, where we just keep getting more and more people coming in and who also like to register to vote, right? We did not meet the record for percentage-wise turnout, just total population. But still, I mean, if you're looking at the entire state of Idaho turnout, we're talking about what, according to the Secretary of State's office, almost 86%, which is pretty fantastic, especially for a state that those are rates that you usually see in states that have mandatory mail-in ballots like a Washington or an Oregon.
Yeah. I was going to say, considering, we don't have these mandatory rules like you mentioned, I do think that is, a pretty impressive number, regardless of, whether you agree with how the election went or who was elected, who lost. I mean, I do take pride in the fact that so many people vote. Because that's always a complaint we hear is, well, people aren't voting. So this is the will of just the active minority. And so, regardless of how we feel about the outcome, I am glad that people voted. That is really important.
100%. Absolutely. Everyone who is able to and feels like they want to vote should vote and should be able to vote.
Majority of Idahoans have voted by nearly 86%. Results are in. We know who's going to be in the legislature this coming session. So what are some things that you are anticipating based on who won, who lost? What are some things that you're anticipating will be priorities for the 2025 legislative session?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that since during the primary, several incumbent Republicans lost their seats, especially in the Magic Valley, which has traditionally been much more of a, stereotypical, not stereotypical, but maybe traditional Republican, just, fiscally conservative and much more middle ground on social issues, let's say. Those people lost their seats to much more hardline conservatives, even some more far right candidates, right? And so that sort of tilt will be represented absolutely within both chambers. And now you have Democrats losing 3 of their seats, 1 in the Senate, 2 in the House, which puts their representation at 14% of all seats.
Yeah.
It's one of the lowest in the country. Not quite the lowest, but one of the lowest in the country. And so you're going to see things play out. The dream of getting school vouchers passed, I think, will be far more likely, right? You've got whether or not the future of Idaho Launch, the tuition grant program that Governor Brad Little put in a couple years ago for graduating high school seniors. That has barely passed by the slimmest of margins, especially in the House. And Democrats always like to say, they're the ones who are kind of breaking that deadlock and voting for things like just general budgets, for instance.
Yeah.
Where that'll pass by 1, 2, maybe 3 votes. And so if you've got more hardline conservatives wanting to tank those budgets, plus fewer Democrats to offset those votes, that's what you're going to see. I also wouldn't be surprised if House Speaker Mike Moyle would drop Democrats from certain committees. Not entirely, but right now, usually most committees have 2, sometimes 3 Democrats compared to 10 Republicans or whatever on a particular committee. But he did that with the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. They dropped a Democratic seat, and now there are only 3 Democrats on that budget writing committee, which is very important and very influential. And these other committees aren't any different because they're the ones who kind of hold the reins as to whether or not a bill is even going to come up for a vote in the full House or Senate. And so you take Democrats off of those committees, whether for political reasons, which, he's shown that he's willing to do that, but also think about workload considerations. There are several committees and they meet multiple times a day / during the week. And if you have fewer people to be on those committees, that either means you're taking a seat away or you have to work even harder and be on more committees. So that would not be a surprise, and we'll learn more about that in December when they have their organizational session.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people talking about potentially the fate of Medicaid expansion, which is something the people of Idaho voted on in 2018. It passed by quite a good margin, and there has been talk for years about repealing that or significantly gutting or changing that. And it seems like potentially now they might have the people and the power to do that. Do you think that could come up this session?
It comes up every year, and that's an excellent way to get back to that committee. The importance of committees, because the House Health and Welfare Chair, Representative John Vanderwoude, he's been a Medicaid expansion opponent forever, right? And he's the one who's been introducing these bills to repeal Medicaid expansion, and his own committee voted against him last year and kept that bill locked in the committee drawer. If Speaker Mike Moyle appoints some of these more far-right conservatives onto that, and maybe a Democrat drops out of that particular committee, that could easily get to the floor where I would have a hard time believing that it wouldn't pass, right? So that's a perfect example of why or what the ramifications of these elections have.
Yeah, yeah. And that's maybe definitely what I wanted to talk about today is just this, the rules that we have, the laws that we have, the things that have already passed are not foregone conclusions, especially we've seen, the Idaho legislature has no problem making major changes to the status quo of Idaho. And so, yeah, especially with some of these hardliners who won their primaries and now won the general, things like Medicaid expansion, I think, are on the table. There's been discussion about another library bill, a harder library bill. It'll be interesting to see what happens with our abortion laws. It seems to me much less likely that there will be any health exemption this session.
Yeah, that would be difficult for me to see just because of how much anguish and sometimes hand wringing there is, behind the scenes from Republicans, some of whom, in private do support, health exemptions, for example. Maybe they're narrowly tailored, but some health exemptions. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a Republican in Idaho who is full throatedly supportive of abortion. But that's why I think that abortion initiative is just going to be have a lot more focus on it, with these sorts of implications from the election. And if you want to go further downstream too, there's going to be a governor's race in 2 years. It's been pretty low kept secret, or not well kept secret, that it really seems like Attorney General Raul Labrador is going to try to take out Brad Little again, which he was unsuccessful in doing so, 4 years ago. But that is a big question in my mind as to whether or not Brad Little is going to, take his political capital and block some of these more hardline far right bills that will inevitably come to his desk, whether that be an enhanced library bill, whether that's a school voucher thing, things like that. You don't want to think that he's weighing just the general political implications over what he thinks is right or wrong. But I think that has to be a calculation in the next 2 years.
Absolutely. I think that's been a calculation for him previously, where he's made statements saying, I don't agree with this, or I think this is a major problem, but I'm going to sign it anyway. So I think moving forward, how much will he play to keep his seat versus stand on principle, I guess, or do what he thinks is correct for the state? Definitely, lots of implications from this election on the legislative session, but what's going to happen in 2 years, ballot measures, gubernatorial races. There are so many implications from this election moving forward. Okay, Jimmy, something I do every Friday is pick of the week, because regardless of what happens, there's always ways to find something good or something that gets us through the week and into the weekend. So what was your pick of the week this week?
Oh, man. All right. So I guess I'm going to throw my nerd cards down on the table. I know this video game came out last year, but I've been kind of sketchy about new Final Fantasy games for a very long time. I haven't really enjoyed any of the newer ones, but Final Fantasy 16, I've probably put a good 15 to 20 hours into that over the last week or so. And that's what's been helping me keep sane and keeping my mind away from just doom scrolling for hours at a time.
Anything that stops you from doom scrolling is, I think, a positive at this point.
How about you? What's your pick of the week?
Okay, so my pick of the week, yours is at least a game. I was like, mine is ice cream. This was a tough week. It was an ice cream week for sure. And so I've talked about it before, but I think the best ice cream in the Treasure Valley is at Truffles in Meridian. It's like, I always hate saying I gatekeep this so hard because it's so good, and I don't want them to be out of my favorite flavors, because it's like they make home batches of this stuff, so there's only a little bit. They have a pumpkin cookie or pumpkin bar ice cream right now that is delicious. It's got like chunks of frosting and like pumpkin bar. It's It is delicious. But then I branched out. I tried something new and I got their mud pie flavor. And that was a winner. That was amazing. It's coffee flavored ice cream with homemade brownies, Oreos, peanut butter, and chocolate chips. It was exactly what I needed after the election results this week and has gotten me through. It's delicious. And
Perfect.
They make all of their own treats that they put in the ice cream. You can also pick up chocolates. I was feeling ice cream this week, they can make any flavor into like an ice cream sandwich with chocolate chip cookies that they make. So anyway, if it's been a rough time, I'm heading to Truffles.
I've got a very serious question for you.
Okay.
Are you a cone or cup girly?
I'm a cone girly, a sugar cone girly.
Not waffle?
Well, waffle cones are good. I just it's a lot. I can only eat a little bit. If it's a hot day, yes, I'll get that waffle cone. It's delicious. But like a little sugar cone, so delicious.
Who's saying no to a cone?
I know. It is the perfect ice cream receptacle and you get to eat it and they smell so good. I don't know who walks into like these ice cream parlors and is like, put it in that paper cup. That would be better than this delicious smelling cone that you just made.
Absolutely. 100%.
I'm glad we can agree on that. In a country that is very divided, I'm glad we agree on the proper receptacle for ice cream.
Thank God. There's at least something that brings us all together.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining me this week, Jimmy. It was fantastic to have you on the show.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. The show is produced by Evelyn Avitia, Frankie Barnhill, and me, Lindsay Van Allen. Blake Hunter writes our Hey Boise newsletter, and our music is by Up As The Down Is The. If you enjoyed our show today, leave us a review. It helps other people find us. We'll be back on Monday with a look at how the Eagle Library is restricting adults from accessing books. You won't want to miss it.